I want to talk about all of the different patterns and these arguments that come with the patterns and how they work, and how they interact with these timings down here. I know it can be a little confusing, and I kind of use my own language here, but I don't really know what else to do. I just kind of make it up as I go along, so I'll try to explain myself as best as I can. Now there are 7 patterns right now. There's strobe, vector, edge, multi, runner, stepper, and random. Now runner and Vectr are actually kind of similar. They're both kind of like tracers, but runner does all of the colors in a group before doing the tracer. Whereas with Vectr, there's a tracer between every color that isn't the tracer. And in both of these, the 0th color, so to speak, the first color, that's the one that's the tracer. And then everything else, you have these 1 through up to 8. You have up to 8 other colors that'll be strobed between in Vectr and stepper. And then stepper and random, multi, strobe, they do colors in an order. With stepper and random, you have the option of doing random orders. I'll show you that a little more in depth whenever I show those specific ones off. But for edge, I think everybody understands how edge works. I believe it's a limited edition chroma mode, where it's almost like a blinky, where it goes backwards, then it does the first color, then it does forwards. And the backwards and forwards colors, they're actually they're shorter lengths than the center. My edge is much more customizable. So center point, I think it's center point, which is a mode on the controls, is also basically an edge mode. So you could recreate that in this as well. And I had modes like barbs and sword that were variations on edge and primer that you can recreate using this. So on the strobe. So strobe has group size, skip after, and repeat group. And the group size and skip after, they're used in kind of 2 different ways. If you leave them at 0, they will select everything. So if you leave group size at 0, no matter how many colors you pick, they'll be played in a row. So repeat group doesn't really matter in that case, because the group's always going to be the same, so you're going to be repeating it infinitely anyway. But if you were to make the group size something like 3 and left skipped after at 0, this would work like blaster. And so in this case, if you leave skip after at 0, it matches what your group size is. And so with the group size at 3 and the skip after at 0, you're going to be picking these first 3 colors and then these next 3 colors. And if I was to make it so there were only 4 colors, it would go red, yellow, green, and then it would choose cyan, blank, blank. Whenever the group size and the skip after are the same, whenever they match, blanks are chosen to sort of pad out the choices whenever there aren't enough, to sort of cover. And so if you wanted to recreate Blaster 3 from Primer, this is how you would do it. You would use these settings right here. And then we have the ability to do something like the candy strobes, where we would actually use a skip after of 1 and then a repeat group of something pretty high. Like we could do something like 25, 50. It's something we have 35 or 32 or 64, depending if you're doing Hyper 3 or DOPS 3 in Primer. So that's the difference here. And if you want to do something like strobe 2, you could do group size of 2. So again, that's how you do a candy strobe. And then down here are your timings. So the strobe time, that's how long it's going to show the color. So it's going to say color blank, color blank. And it's going to do that until it reaches your group size before it picks the next group. And then between groups, it plays this tail blank. So whenever you leave blank at 0, strobe at something low with a long tail blank, you get something like a blinky. If you were to remove the tail blank entirely and you're to make a strobe with a blank, well, then you have a more traditional kind of strobe. If you have no blank and just a strobe, that's a ribbon. You could do chroma by making like an 11 here. I think chroma is 11 milliseconds. Those are your options for strobe. Strobe is pretty straightforward, but there's a lot of variation there. It's kind of the go-to. I think it's kind of the most expressive. It lets you just use your colors to express yourself, and then you can use these group sizes, these skip afters, you can use that to express yourself even a little more in depth. Then we can go down here and Vectr again, which is basically a tracer, but Vex and tracer are the same thing. So Vectr is Vex and tracer combined, and so you repeat your strobe or you repeat your tracer a certain number of times. And if you want to do Vex, you'd repeat something like 3 times. And so if you want to do a morph where we're going to blend from a tracer, if we're going to blend from a Vectr to a tracer, we would do this at, say, like 3 here, and then we would leave our split blank to match whatever our tracer blank is. So in this case, we're going to do like a 25 millisecond tracer blank and like a 3 millisecond tracer strobe. And then we're going to do a 5 millisecond strobe. And that's going to have, nothing between it, because it doesn't, there's only going to be one. We're only picking the one. So we're going to blend that into something that's a more traditional tracer. So again, no blank there, and there's going to be no split blank this time, and there's going to be no tracer blank. So instead we're just going to have a tracer strobe of 25. And so if you try this on your light, you see it goes from a Vex to a tracer. So again, very simple. That's using your thresholds. That's using the different timings. You can change the number of repeats. You can do different cool things with this. And again, runner is very, very similar. So if we look at runner, I'm going to skip around and show you runner. The only difference with runner is that there's a group size and skip between and repeat runner. So there's no option to repeat the tracer. But if you were to choose a group size of 1 and a skip between of 1, well, then this actually acts as a Vectr. But it's confusing to have to explain that. So it's its own pattern, even though they could basically act this way. And then I would obviously have to, create a repeat and figure out how to handle the repeat there. But in this case, I like this having them separated like that. And so now we have this option of, handling Vex and runner. Let's look at edge. Edge has just a group size. So group size with no skip after. The skip after is always the same for edge. So in the case of edge, you're always going to be padded. These are always going to be padded. So there's no there's no layover. There's no like crossover. So if I were to do a group size here of 3, I would have just a purple on its own sometimes. Edge also has strobe, blank. That's self-explanatory, and then a center strobe and then a tail blank. So the way that an edge goes is it does the strobe color, then the blank, then a strobe, then a blank. So it would go cyan, green, yellow. Then it does the center strobe. So it would do red. And then it would do the blank again, and then it would do yellow, green, cyan. And then it would do the tail blank. So edge goes down, then up. And the blanks are sort of how they are in the color palette. The blanks exist between the cyan and the green and the yellow and the red and the yellow and the green, and then the green and the cyan. And then there's a long blank as it travels back around to the red. Now let's look at multi. Multi gives you 3 different patterns, well, up to 3, because there's this use third option. You can choose to only use 2 patterns, or you could use all 3 patterns. And in the case of using all 3 patterns, you have to make sure you have settings for all of them, or it can look a little goofy. I mean, you can actually fade in third patterns, but you have to watch it how it'll affect the way that it iterates through your colors. It might change the way you think that it iterates through colors. So the way that it does this is it repeats the first pattern a number of times, the second pattern a number of times, and a third pattern a number of times. And it plays this separating blank between each pattern. So in the case of the third pattern where there's only a repeat of 1, the blank is never actually used. So if the repeat is 1, it doesn't matter what you set these blanks to, they're never going to be used. It just uses the strobe times. So that's sort of demonstrated here in the default. And then with the skip colors, if you leave skip colors at 0, it will play all 3 patterns with 1 color before switching to the next. If you put skip colors at 1, it'll play, red, yellow, green, and then it'll go around yellow, green, cyan, then back, green, cyan, red. If you do 2, it's like saying skip 2 in between. So I'm going to do red, green, yellow, etc., etc. It's all math based. It can get a little confusing, but just play around. Like there's definitely like a lot of cool stuff that you can find in multi. I think the preset kind of shows off a little bit of what it can be done, but I think you can take it a lot further. Stepper. If you look at Lego in the presets that I ship with this, you see kind of how I can recreate. Yeah, you can recreate Lego mode. But use steps as how many of these steps am I going to use? Each step is played in turn unless random steps is turned on, and each color is played in turn unless random colors is turned on. And so it would play, red for 2 milliseconds, then a blank. Yellow for 4 milliseconds and a blank. Green for 6, blank. Cyan, 8, blank. Red, 10, blank. Yellow, 2, blank, etc. It would just kind of repeat around and around and around again. Stepper is pretty self-explanatory. I'm not going to go too in-depth on it. But again, Lego mode shows off how you can use random steps to recreate Lego mode from Neo and from some versions of Primer. And down here we have random, which is completely random. So you can either turn random colors on or off. By default, it's on. Time multiplier is so that it's not every millisecond in between low and high. It's actually low and high are the base number that's picked, and it's multiplied by the time multiplier. So in this case, the strobes you get are going to be either 4 milliseconds, 8 milliseconds, 12 milliseconds, 60 milliseconds, or 20 milliseconds, that 1 to 5. And then because the blank low and blank high are the same, they're always going to also be the same. So they're always going to be 20 milliseconds. So that's how the time multiplier acts with the strobe low and strobe high and the blank low and blank high. And again, blank low and blank high, they're inclusive. So you'll get 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 as your choices for strobe times. It's not like you get 1, 2, 3, and 4. So people who are used to computer programmers might think that way, but I have it fixed for those of you who might not be used to that nomenclature. So there you go. There's all the patterns in pretty good detail. So if there's any more questions, you guys can start by looking at the modes that come distributed with Vectr. There's a lot of variety on demonstration there, and you can learn a lot about how to make your own stuff just from looking at what's included in the distribution. So thank you guys again for using Vectr. I really appreciate it,